รายการต่อไปนี้เป็นรายการทั่วไปสามารถรับชมได้ทุกวัย
สวัสดีค่ะนอกเหนือจากเทพีเสรีภาพและตึก Empire State แล้วอีกหนึ่งไฮไลท์ของมหานครนิวยอร์กตอนนี้ก็คือสวนสาธารณะไฮไลน์ค่ะเป็นสวนสาธารณะลอยฟ้าซึ่งอยู่เหนือพื้นดินประมาณ9 เมตรนะคะอยู่ทางตะวันตกของเกาะแมนฮัตตันสร้างขึ้นมาจากรางรถไฟสายเก่าที่ไม่ใช้งานแล้วค่ะนอกเหนือจากความสวยงามของสวนสาธารณะแล้วนะคะซึ่งทำให้เป็นที่นิยมอย่างมากนี่คือกรณีตัวอย่างที่ดีค่ะที่ทำให้เห็นนะคะว่าเราสามารถนำสิ่งที่ไม่ใช้แล้วกลับมาทำใหม่แล้วก็ทำให้เกิดประโยชน์กับชุมชนมองเรามองโลกได้มีโอกาสพูดคุยกับคุณโจชัวเดวิดผู้ร่วมก่อตั้งกลุ่ม Friends of the High Line ซึ่งเป็นองค์กรที่ต่อสู้ไม่ให้รางรถไฟสายเก่านี้ถูกทำลายแล้วก็เปลี่ยนให้กลายมาเป็นสวนสาธารณะเราไปฟังแรงบันดาลใจและแนวคิดของคุณโจชัวเดวิดกันนะคะรวมถึงกระบวนการกว่าจะมาเป็นสวนสวยงามอย่างทุกวันนี้รับรองค่ะว่าได้แนวคิดดีๆค่ะไฮไลน์เป็นสวนสาธารณะลอยฟ้าที่สร้างบนทางรถไฟยกระดับที่ไม่ใช้แล้วตั้งอยู่ทางตะวันตกของแมนฮัตตันมีความยาวทั้งสิ้น 1.45 ไมล์หรือ 2.3 กิโลเมตรผู้ที่ริเริ่มโครงการและบริหารจัดการโครงการคือองค์กรไม่หวังผลกำไร Friends of the High Line ปัจจุบันมีคนมาที่ High Line ถึง 6,200,000 คนต่อปีในแต่ละปีมีการจัดกิจกรรมมากกว่า 450 กิจกรรม High Line กลายเป็นสถานที่ที่คนมาเยือนมากที่สุดแห่งหนึ่งของมหานครนิวยอร์กมากกว่าเทพีเสรีภาพมากกว่าตึก Empire State และมากกว่าพิพิธภัณฑ์ศิลปะสมัยใหม่ของนิวยอร์กโจชัวเดวิดเป็นผู้ร่วมก่อตั้ง Friends of the High Line ร่วมกับโรเบิร์ตแฮมมอนด์และปัจจุบันเขาเป็นประธานขององค์กรแห่งนี้ด้วยโจชัวเป็นคนในชุมชนเชลซีของนิวยอร์กมายาวนานเขาเป็นผู้ทำงานรณรงค์เพื่อเอาถนนในนิวยอร์กมาใช้ในการขี่จักรยานการเดินการใช้รถขนส่งสาธารณะแทนการขับรถยนต์ก่อนหน้าจะมาก่อตั้ง Friends of the High Line โจชัวทำงานเป็นนักเขียนและบรรณาธิการอิสระให้กับนิตยสารหลายเล่มเช่น Gourmet, Fortune, Travel and Leisure และ Wallpaper เป็นต้น
Josh, where did you get the idea for the Highline project from?
Well, I'd lived down the street from the High Line for many years and hadn't paid it much attention, but one day I was walking around doing some research and I realized that this odd artifact that was in my neighborhood was actually 1.5 miles long and connected 3 different neighborhoods, and that seemed like an amazing opportunity to do something incredible with it so that you could experience the city in a new way.
But why do you want to turn it into a park?
It had been built for freight trains. Freight trains used to run up there, and the neighborhood around it didn't like the trains originally. They stopped running because traffic began to move onto trucks on the highway. And when the trains stopped running, the neighbors were very glad that there weren't trains there anymore. So we didn't want to bring trains back on it. And New York needs a lot of open space. It's a very dense city, and so we need our parks and open space. So it seemed like a really great opportunity to create a park up there.
เส้นทางรถไฟไฮไลน์สร้างขึ้นครั้งแรกเมื่อปี 1934 เป็นการยกรางรถไฟขึ้นสูงจากพื้นดินถึง 30 ฟุต หรือ 9 เมตร รถไฟที่สัญจรเป็นรถไฟขนส่งสินค้าจำพวกอาหารและสินค้าเกษตรไปสู่โรงงานและโกดังต่างๆแต่แล้วก็ค่อยๆลดความสำคัญลงในช่วงปี 1950 เนื่องจากมีการใช้รถบรรทุกขนส่งระหว่างรัฐแทนสุดท้ายไฮไลน์ได้หยุดให้บริการในปี 1980 ในปี 1999 องค์กร Friends of the High Line ที่ก่อตั้งโดยโจชัว เดวิดและโรเบิร์ต แฮมมอนด์ซึ่งเป็นผู้อาศัยอยู่บริเวณนั้นได้ฟ้องร้องนครนิวยอร์กเพื่อรักษาทางรถไฟไว้จากการถูกรื้อถอนและนำมาทำเป็นพื้นที่สาธารณะแทน
So now you have the idea to turn it into a park. What do you do next?
Well, the big challenge was by the time we'd come along, the city of New York had already decided they wanted to tear down the High Line. So we had to mount a fight. We went to the mayor and asked him, it was Mayor Giuliani at that time, and asked him if he would reconsider the city's commitment to demolition. He wouldn't, and so we ultimately had to sue the city of New York to stop demolition. And that was really the thing that catalyzed us to start an organization, Friends of the High Line, because in order to sue the city of New York, you need to raise funds, you need to show support, and so that was really the birth of our organization building.
So in the end, you won the lawsuit.
We won the lawsuit in the first round, but then we lost it later on down the road. But at that point, it didn't matter because a new mayor had come in, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and he offered us the opportunity to argue our case for the High Line, and so we went to his administration and did that. There was a deputy mayor for economic development then named Dan Doctoroff, and we went and presented our case to him for the economic benefits of saving the High Line. And we demonstrated that if you made an investment of $100 million in the High Line, the city would see a return of $262 million over a 20-year period based on revenues of taxes. The property would become more valuable around it, and as the property became more valuable, the taxes paid to the city for that property would grow, and so they would get great new revenues. And that was one of the things that they took into consideration as they decided what they wanted to do. And combined with the vision for the project, made them ultimately decide that they wanted to support saving the High Line and making it into a park.
หลังจากต่อสู้เพื่อรักษาทางรถไฟไว้ได้สำเร็จในปี 2002 ถึง 2003 Friends of the High Line ได้เริ่มแผนงานการอนุรักษ์และนำมาใช้ประโยชน์ใหม่ของ High Line ปี 2004 มีการหาทีมดีไซน์สำหรับสวนสาธารณะ High Line และทีมที่ได้รับเลือกคือบริษัท James Cornerfield Operations ร่วมกับดิลเลอร์ สโกฟิดิโอ และเรนโฟรและพีท อูดอล์ฟ ปี 2006 เริ่มต้นเปลี่ยนทางรถไฟเก่าให้เป็นสวนสาธารณะ ปี 2009 ส่วนแรกของสวนสาธารณะ High Line จากแกนส์บอร์ดถึง West 20th Street เปิดให้บริการแก่ประชาชน ปี 2011 ส่วนที่ 2 ของสวนตั้งแต่ West 20th ถึง West 30th Street เปิดให้บริการแก่ประชาชน ปี 2014 ส่วนที่ 3 และเป็นส่วนเหนือสุดของสวนที่ The Rail Yards จาก West 30th ถึง West 34th เปิดให้บริการแก่ประชาชน
You went through a lot of work in order to get this park done. Why do you want it so badly?
Well, a lot of different reasons. First of all, when we first started, it was a period in which a lot of interesting older historic buildings in my neighborhood were being torn down, and not sort of mediocre new buildings going up in their place. And so it felt like we were losing a lot of the historic context of our neighborhood. And the High Line was a piece of Manhattan's history as an industrial and transportation hub. There used to be lots of factories, giant ocean liners, trains coming down the streets.
It's just an old railway.
But it was part of an economy that was very important in New York City's history. And so preserving a piece of that was one important thing. We also needed parks and open space in our neighborhood, which was one of the least well-served for parks and open spaces in all of New York City. And it was a time where people were really rededicating themselves to New York City and making New York City a better place. All of those things together really made us want to devote ourselves to this.
Friends of the High Line ได้ดูแลสวนสาธารณะ High Line ทั้งในแง่ของการจัดการ การบำรุงรักษาและการจัดกิจกรรมในสวน โดยต้องหาทุนจากการบริจาคจากการขายอาหารและการขายของที่ระลึกเพื่อมาเป็นทุนในการดำเนินการด้วยตัวเอง
How do you get the other stakeholders on board with you, like all the communities around the area and donors as well?
It's a long, complicated process, and you have to be patient, and it's a lot of one-on-one conversations. You take everybody one at a time.
Like what, you knock on doors and talk to them?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, a version of that. We spent a lot of time sitting down with our neighbors, with members of community boards, with local businesses, going to meet with elected officials one by one, presenting the project to them. Sometimes in larger groups, you do a presentation to a larger group. But it's just, one at a time, you build a community. We were lucky because we thought initially maybe nobody would want to be part of this. This was sort of a crazy sounding project and maybe nobody would want to do it. But we were lucky that visionary quality of the project really excited people, and very quickly people rallied around us. We had a lot of support very quickly.
What were the main concerns of the communities around the High Line at that time?
I think there was one concern: would it ever really happen? Was this just too crazy? In some city planning circles, there's a great belief that elevated structures separate communities and divide communities and create barriers. So there were some people who thought that. And then there were people who just thought, this will never work. You'll go through all of this effort, you'll spend all this money, and it will never work because nobody will ever go to a park that's 30 feet in the air to climb up 3 flights of stairs to go to the park, keep the parks on the ground. Nobody will be there, and because of that, it'll be dangerous, it'll become neglected. And so there were concerns there as well.
But you pushed on.
We pushed on.
And you get everyone on board.
We got most everybody on board.
How did you do that?
I think it's a lot of listening to people's concerns, acknowledging that those are real, genuine concerns, talking about the ways that you can address them, and beginning to show them that there was really a wide base of support for this project and people were excited about it. And I think when Mayor Bloomberg's administration signed on to it, and it began to look more and more possible. There was still a lot we had to do after he signed on. It wasn't a done deal. But as it began to look more possible and not just a crazy, dreamlike idea, people began to get more excited about it and think, well, what if this really did happen? That could be really amazing.
Highline เป็นสวนสาธารณะลอยฟ้าที่มีดีไซน์เฉพาะตัวเป็นอย่างมาก การออกแบบเป็นความร่วมมือของบริษัท James Cornerfield Operations ร่วมกับ Dealers Scofidio และ Renfro และ Pete Udolph แรงบันดาลใจในการออกแบบมาจากเหล่าต้นไม้ใบหญ้าที่ผุดขึ้นมาเองตามช่องของรางรถไฟในช่วง 25 ปีหลังจากที่รถไฟหยุดวิ่ง ผู้ออกแบบต้องการคงความเป็นธรรมชาติที่มีอยู่เอาไว้ให้มากที่สุด รวมถึงพืชพันธุ์ที่เลือกมาปลูกในสวนแห่งนี้จะเป็นต้นที่มีความทนทานตายยากมีรูปทรงและสีที่หลากหลายกันไปและเน้นการปลูกพืชท้องถิ่นของอเมริกา
So now you have the money, and then you need a design.
Yes.
So what's the design concepts of this High Line?
Well, the whole process that we went through for the design was really interesting. In the beginning, we wanted to first really just think about it and catalyze exciting new ideas about it. So the first thing we did wasn't a competition to select the actual designers, but was an ideas competition. What are great ideas of things you might be able to do with the High Line? They didn't have to be realistic. They didn't have to be financially rational. They didn't have to be rational in any way. We just wanted to. It was a very unusual.
Just creative, right?
Creative. We had 720 entries from 36 different countries come in.
Wow.
With all sorts of crazy ideas. There was one that wanted to turn it into a 1.5-mile long swimming pool. There was another one that had a roller coaster on it.
Wow.
There were farms, there were cemeteries, there were all sorts of different things on it. Yes, cemeteries. So we did that just to get people thinking in broad, creative ways about it. And then we did, in partnership with the city and Friends of the High Line did it together, a competition to actually pick a team of designers and a design. And that was a very rigorous process. There were teams made up of landscape architects, lighting designers, planting designers, historic preservationists,
Now, serious.
etc.
This is serious.
This is serious. And we gave them a complex challenge. There was a beautiful landscape existing on the High Line that nature had created. And that was what we'd fallen in love with and wanted to open to the public. But if you opened it to the public, it would be destroyed. It would be trampled. It was a pristine wilderness that heavy urban traffic would just destroy. So we asked them to come up with their best idea of how do you create a landscape that evokes that idea, the idea of nature taking over a man-made structure, something wild and unkempt on top of something heavy and industrial. Something that evoked that concept but would allow the public access to. So this process started first with 51 teams, then went down to 7 teams, then went down to 4 teams, and finally the winning team that we picked, James Corner Field Operations, Diller Scafidio and Renfro, and Pete Udolph, who came up with a concept that we found really compelling and beautiful.
What is the main concept of this winning team?
There are a lot of things in it, but I think the base thing, the real challenge was how do you create a way to move up there that feels like it's in a natural environment where the path isn't behind railings or with curbs next to it, but the landscape and the path sort of merge together. And what they proposed was a kind of walkway made out of long cement planks that at their edges split apart the way my fingers are splitting apart and allow the plants to come up between them so that the edge between the planted area and the hard walkway is a blurry edge. So it softens that edge and makes the path feel more like it's a part of the landscape. So that was the basic concept that really differentiated their design from the others.
Is sustainability also a big element?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like a 1.5 mile long green roof. The soils that we use up there are very similar to the soil mixtures that get used on green roofs. It's designed to capture the water that rains down and funnel it into the planting bed, so there's very little runoff. And all of our horticultural practices are environmental. We don't use any chemical fertilizers, no chemical pesticides. All of the plant waste that comes off of the High Line is composted. So it's a very sustainable park.
Why do you think people like it so much?
I think it places you in the city in a way that's unlike anything else. It's only three stories, 30 feet off the ground. So you're seeing the city from above, but not so far above that you're separated from it. You're part of the city.
So the view must be very nice.
The view is, it's not a spectacular view the way that going to the top of the Empire State Building is a view. It's a much more modest view than that. But that's sort of what's interesting about it. You're seeing the city sort of as you always see it, but in a slightly new way. And I think also people love it for the beauty of its design and the beauty of its plantings. We have an amazing horticulturist, a plantsman named Pete Udolph from the Netherlands, who created a really spectacular planting design inspired by the natural condition of the High Line, but improved with a lot of different plants that bloom all through the season. And it's really quite spectacular. And I think there's also a great social dynamic about it, and I think that excites people as well. It's a place you see your neighbors, you bump into friends, you see strangers. You're coming in very close contact with people in a way that you don't necessarily on the street. And I'd always hoped that the High Line would have that kind of social quality, everybody coming out and doing some kind of walk together and seeing each other. And it very much has that feeling. It feels like a very social environment.
Is it free of charge to walk on the High Line?
It's completely free of charge. We're a New York City public park with no admission. What makes us different from many parks is everything, all of its maintenance and operations are not paid for by the city. They're paid for by Friends of the High Line. The budget in New York City for the Parks Department is very small. And the city told us, we can help you build this park, but we'll never be able to help you maintain it. So we agreed that we would raise the money to maintain it. So on top of all of those other funds that I told you about that we had to raise, every year we have to raise all of the funds that are necessary to maintain it.
How much is the total construction cost?
It's about $180 million.
And what is the maintenance cost each year?
For that which you see on the park itself, that which you're experiencing on the park is about, that includes all of the horticultural maintenance, all of the custodial work, and all of our education work. We teach some 4,000 school children a year up there, and we have a very robust public art program with some 30 separate art installations every year. That totals about $7 million a year.
So can I say that it's always a good idea to turn this used space, whether a railway or any other type of spaces, into parks? People will somehow love it.
I think it's a good idea to look at. I think what made the High Line successful was very particular to the High Line itself. It's the neighborhood it's in New York City, the fact that there are so many people in New York City to come use it. There are a lot of things that are very specific about the High Line that made it successful. But I do think before you decide to get rid of these industrial structures elsewhere, you should look and see what their potential is. What could you do with them? Maybe it's not a park, maybe it's a gallery, maybe it's housing, maybe it really depends on the structure itself and the context of where it's found and the people who are around it and what they want and need.
So do you plan to do more parks on railways?
I don't know if I personally will do more parks on railways, but it's very exciting to see other people taking the lessons of the High Line and applying them in other contexts. So, for instance, there are 2 parks on railways that are under development now. There's one in Chicago. It used to be called the Bloomingdale Trail. Now it's called the 606. And that's actually underway, under construction, funded, and happening. And there's another one in Philadelphia that there was just an announcement a couple of days ago called the Reading Viaduct, which just received funding to advance as part of a group of parks that are going to be developed in Philadelphia. So it's very exciting to see projects that are very similar to the High Line going forward. At the same time, it inspires a lot of projects that are similar in that they're reuse of old structures, but they're doing something very different. And for instance, there's one in New York called the Low Line, which is an underground trolley terminal that a group wants to turn into an interior public space. And we've also inspired another project in New York called Plus Pool, a group that wants to build a self-filtering floating swimming pool in the river so you can swim in river water and see the city from this new perspective out on the water. So we're inspiring all sorts of projects, either ones that are very similar or things that take some of the principles of what we've done and apply them in entirely new and creative ways.
How often do you walk on this park?
Well,
High
my
Line?
office, I can get to my office directly off the High Line now, so I bike to work half the time and I walk to work the other half the time, and every time I walk to work, I walk on the High Line, so it's several times a week.
How do you feel walking on this park?
I'm always amazed every single time that I've set foot on it because it seemed so difficult at the beginning. It seemed like it would never happen. We wanted it to happen so badly, and there were so many challenges, so many problems to be solved. How will you get up there? How will you protect the edges? Will plants really grow up there? Will it connect to other buildings or not? Will people come? And with all of the problems and challenges that were involved in doing it, every time I walk up the stairs up there, I'm amazed that there are public stairs open to the public every single day, that anybody in my neighborhood can walk up there anytime they want and go up into this incredibly beautiful place. I'm always amazed by it and always touched by it. It's really incredible.
สวนสาธารณะไฮไลท์ถือว่าเป็นตัวอย่างที่ดีมากเลยนะคะในการนำเอาสิ่งเก่ามาสร้างใหม่แล้วก็เกิดประโยชน์ต่อ สาธารณชนค่ะโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งการสร้างพื้นที่สีเขียวซึ่งกลายเป็นสิ่งที่หลายเมืองทั่วโลกขาดแคลนค่ะสำหรับประเทศไทยไม่ว่าจะเป็นใครหรือว่าหน่วยงานไหนหากคิดจะสร้างพื้นที่สีเขียวมากยิ่งขึ้นย่อมได้รับการสนับสนุนแล้วก็เป็นสิ่งที่ดีนะคะส่วนไฮไลท์ก็น่าจะเป็นแรงบันดาลใจแล้วก็เป็นบทเรียนที่เรานั้นจะต้องนำมาศึกษาค่ะพบกันใหม่สัปดาห์หน้าวันนี้สวัสดีค่ะ